Hi, everybody. For many of us, public speaking is terrifying. It's not something we look forward to. But then there are those who love public speaking so much that they decide to make a full-time career out of it. So to talk more about the life of a public speaker, I talked to Dan Chuparkoff, a professional keynote speaker at various events who I worked with in the past, who's an excellent product manager and product leader, to learn more about what is it like to be a professional public speaker and answer a bunch of questions ranging from how do you come up with topics to discuss, what the logistics of this look like, and more in this really fun chat. So stick around. Dan, it is great to meet you. And so for those of you listening or watching, I met Dan in person multiple times. He used to work at Google on the same team I was in. So it was great to connect with him then. And now I've been following Dan online for several years as well. A lot of interesting things that we will talk about on that front as well. So Dan, thank you for taking the time to chat.
Awesome. Thank you, Karupa. Thanks for having me. It's been an exciting time. The last couple of years have been really crazy and great at the same time. I'm looking forward to cracking some of those things open and talking about how change is changing all the teams in the world. So
yeah, no, excited. And, we'll definitely touch upon what happened in the last couple of years, but I want to go, like I always like to do with all my guests, kind of go back to the beginning and ask what made you get interested in getting into tech, the whole tech field and all the stuff that went around it.
Yeah, for sure. There's a pretty definitive pivot point for me. A long time ago, I was actually, when I was in high school still, I took a couple of drafting classes and it was really fun for me. I heard a little bit about architects and what they do in the world and designing buildings that you could drive down the street and look at and see this building. I made that. Like that sort of permanence to the work as an artifact was always really enticing to me. So my senior year in high school, I got an internship at an architecture firm. And this is 1986. And at the time, architecture was like a drawing on paper kind of a job, right? Sometimes, you'd be drawing on what they called Mylar, which is like almost a plastic film, and you draw in ink so that it would stay, it wouldn't get erased. And we had these drafting boards. You can imagine them. You've seen them before, the slanted desks with a ruler like attached. And I'm sitting there drawing I started January my senior year, and I worked there through that semester and then for the summer before I went off to college. My intention was to go off to college and become an architect. And I'm as an intern wandering around, meeting some of the architects there. They gave me some jobs to work on, but those jobs as an intern, as a 17-year-old kid, pretty much the only thing they'll let you do in an architecture office is draw the lines in a parking lot on a plan. So they would draw some building with this huge triangle shaped parking lot. And they would say, Dan, tell me how many spaces we can fit in this lot. And I would figure out where the medians go and figure out if it had one entrance or two. And then I would draw the lines over and over and over again. And I spent months drawing parking lot lines. And one day I'm putting the plans in a storage room. We have those flat filing cabinets where you store big plans. And I'm putting some plans away, and I meet this one guy who I'd never seen before. I introduced myself, and he introduced him back, and his name was Mr. Pak, P-A-K. And I said, how come I've never met you? I've been here 3 months. And he said, oh, because my office is down here because my plotter makes too much noise. And I said, what's a plotter? And he said, come here, let me show you. And I go in his office, and he's got a drafting board just like everyone else did, but he also has a computer and this big printer thing that it's hard to even describe how it worked right now, but he showed me how it worked, and I could copy paste parking lot spaces on this computer. And we say the word copy paste all the time now, but in 1986, that was magic. To just draw something one time and then say plop, 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 plop. That saved me weeks of work. And I just knew this computer was going to completely change the face of architecture. So I changed my major immediately, started focusing on computer science. And now I try to change every industry with little copy paste things so that they can all work more productively and faster.
Did you go into computer science to continue to do more architecture work in a digital form, or did you end up wanting to do something different once you got into it?
No, no, like instantly. Well, first of all, as a naive kid, I thought, okay, well, architecture's already been fixed now. So I should figure out how to take computers and fix other industries. And so I went into computer science thinking like, okay, well, our job as computer scientists is just to go from industry to industry and figure out how we can help make them more productive. And so one, I didn't so much care about architecture design because Autodesk already made it. AutoCAD now existed, and I figured, they would keep working on it. Well, I've always thought about what it would have been like to have gone to Autodesk and worked. Autodesk makes our architecture software for those that don't know. And that would have been pretty cool, convergence of fields. But I never really, I just sort of abandoned architecture as soon as I saw that computer science could change how people worked in that massive way.
That's pretty funny. I have a similar story in some ways. When I was in high school, my first, we had like options of classes you can take beyond your core classes you could do. And the only thing that seemed remotely interesting to me was drafting, which was like one of
Yeah,
the precursors to like, some of this work. So drafting one was I'm literally on the board using the slide rule, like the one where like, you have the horizontal and vertical rulers
yeah,
and
yeah, yeah.
drawing lines on paper and learning like, how to do angles and measurements and, going from like small sizes to big sizes and scales between them and so on. But the next edition of like, drafting 2, I figured it was called, that was on AutoCAD. And so
Yeah,
that's when you actually like do all the work you've done here, but now you're on this like, you see this like white blank virtual grid with like small dots in it. And you're like, okay, let me adjust the dots so it's going to do snapping properly. So when I learned snapping, that was a huge life changer because I didn't know that. So I'm like, I'm working in like either centimeters or feet or some arbitrary value, but the
yeah,
dots were like in a different value. So I'm like trying to line up in between them. Once I figured I could customize it to actually make the actual snapping match the unit of measurement I'm using, that was a game changer. So for me, when you said like you were like drawing lines manually, but then you were like on the computer I can do lines this way, that
right.
to me was like taking a real life thing and being able to make it smaller and use the plot lines to convert it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
That was huge.
yeah.
And for whatever reason, I think that was like new enough. And in the city I was in, they had all these like legacy plans of like things that need to be digitized. And so
Oh,
they're like, who
yeah, yeah,
better than children who are learning about this because that solves multiple problems and
right.
and they can do this. And so I remember like looking at these plans of like I think it was actually like an intersection with like a sewer line, a gas line, all these things be under the ground. It was like
Yeah,
a little piece of paper.
right,
And we were asked like, can you make this all into like a digital form? And
right.
that was my first foray into, I guess, like what you were describing here, where I'm like, yeah, I can absolutely see this connection between this physical world and then the computer world makes this a whole lot more accurate, reproducible, shareable. Now it's archived somewhere, so it's no longer a case where the paper were to get burned or water damage or
Right,
just
right, right.
disintegrate. You still
Mm.
have all this going. And so yeah, so when you were describing the drafting story, it reminded me of like my time doing very similar things. Of course, I didn't do that beyond it after that. There was no drafting 3 and I went to college and I did other things, but it is fun that there's a connection there.
Yeah, that is amazing. And yeah, drafting was one of those things where in high school, there's electives. There's the classes they force you to take, and then there's the electives.
Yeah,
And drafting was one of the only things that was like an elective that could also be a job when you
that
were
is
done.
true.
Right. And so that was just super enticing to me. I was like, people choose to do this. They're not forced. And that
Yeah,
was
and often when you walk by the rooms where the drafting class is taught, it was very different. It wasn't your traditional classroom with just like repurposed like things on the whiteboard to be different. It was actually like a different arrangement. You had larger desks, you had chairs, it was very different. So you were like, I want to try this out because who knows what's going to be there.
right, right, right. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Anyway, so that's where I got started. I little by little went into computers, and then I started work in the '90s. 94 was my first corporate job, and they had just got PCs for the first time, and they were transitioning from old mainframe computers like dumb terminals where the computer was in the basement. We just had keyboards. And for me, that was that same thing. Hey, we're getting PCs here. I'm going to help you figure out how to use these to do your work. And then we got the internet, and then we got mobile phones, and then we got cloud, and then we got like data science, and then we got remote teams, and now we have AI. For me, this is just like the seventh transformation in a long series of transformations that's never going to stop.
So you studied, architecture formally. Was
Yeah.
there a fear that you were basically had all the sunk cost in having studied architecture, but now you're embarking on a career that does not really use that in its literal direct sense?
First of all, I did change. I changed my major in school, so I worked, a couple years on trying to get an architecture degree. That, well, when I tell the story, it seems like this binary switch, and it was in my head, but I didn't actually follow it with my body right away. So I started working on architecture, and I would do these drafting classes and, model building and all these things. And I was doing okay at that. I was like a C, B minus student in that stuff. And then I would have a CAD class and I would like just plow through it. It was great. Um, and then I took some other computer classes, and little by little, I realized that computer classes are just way more intuitive for me than the other things. And so, I sort of gradually, my architecture triangle got smaller and smaller and smaller, while my computer science triangle got bigger and bigger and bigger. And I always realized, learning how the old thing was done made me better at finding the product value in the new things I was trying to build. So I never really thought of it as sunk cost. I always looked at it as ways of learning how they used to do it, so that I could preserve the things that were important and automate the things that were boring and slow.
Makes a lot of sense then. So from there, how did you choose your first job to formally work on after getting your computer science education?
Yeah, so that was kind of, serendipity a little bit. I was actually still in school. I had been because I changed my major halfway through. I was on like the 7-year plan for bachelor's degrees. And so I'm going to school, taking classes during the day. And one day I saw in the newspaper, before we had Monster, we used to look for jobs in the Sunday paper. And there, in the want ads, there was a job for a computer operator. And it essentially said, computer operator, will train, works nights. And I was like, I can still go to the school. It says computers. I like them. They're going to train me, so they need nothing from me. And I went there, and I, had applied and got the job. And that was really the only thing I had applied to do that was a real job. And I was still in school, so I wasn't really like on my um, on my job search yet. I wasn't like doing career fairs and stuff like that, because I was still just a junior in college. So I started doing that, and then I stayed working there as I finished school, and kept doing more and more computer stuff as they went through their PC transformation. And I spent 10 years at that place, and they bought a software startup, and I went to help run it, and that's what really got me onto the software side of things.
Yeah. As an aside, you just mentioned Monster.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
had no idea if they're still around. I remember like, wait, that's where people applied for jobs back in the day. I remember when I was in college, Monster.com was the place you went to.
yeah,
They're still around. I didn't
yeah,
realize
yeah,
that.
yeah. They are. There's kind of an interesting story that also overlaps on my resume. Um, Before Monster.com, there was a company called Telephone Marketing Programs. They were a company that managed and sold advertising in the Yellow Pages phone book. Right. So, before we had the internet, we would get the Yellow Pages and thumb through and look for plumbers. Um, you could also thumb through that and look for jobs. And this one company called TMP, Telephone Marketing Programs, started making job boards in the Yellow Pages. They were local to a zip code, right, a phone area code, and they were all the things that were great about job listings now. And so TMP started creating job boards. That became such a successful part of their sales business that they spun it off and called it Monster.com. Then 2000 happened and Monster.com exploded. They made so much money, they bought TMP, their former parent company. And so Monster.com became the parent company of their original TMP. And 15 years after all that happened, they had split apart again, and I went to work at TMP, which was the original company, and they were still doing like recruitment job board sites for people. You can still look them up. Actually, no, they've changed their name now. It'll be in the speaker notes later. I forget the name of the new place. But long meandering career path for me, and it did overlap with Monster.
That is amazing. I always knew that Must.com. I vaguely remember TMP because for whatever reason, I just like to dive into companies just for the fun of it. And I
Mm-hmm.
remember reading this a long time ago. I did not realize that you had a direct connection with
Yeah.
that particular, right?
Yeah. Anyway.
And so one of the things look to your career is that you mentioned earlier about how I like to identify problems that needed to be solved and how computers can help solve them. And I think that probably played a big role in the career path you took. You've been in product management, you've been in consulting, and all these various areas. And so walk me through a little bit of that. When did you decide to go from, in some ways, like working with computers and like helping people on a smaller scale to then trying to have impact on a much larger scale? Because you worked on various roles where you're defining a large part of the strategy for a company and things like that.
Yeah, yeah. So I think first, intuitively, I just always was a product manager. Like when I was doing homework in junior high, I was looking for ways to do that homework more efficiently, right? When I was working at McDonald's before the internship in high school, I was looking for ways to, do our stuff at McDonald's more efficiently. I was always just a problem solver. It's just fun for me. It's like a puzzle that you're trying to solve. And little by little, I started majoring in computer science and started programming as a developer for that first company that I worked at. And for that, my first developer project was I was a solo developer by myself on a project. I was assigned to a sales team, and they said, "Hey, just go work with this sales team and make stuff that will help them." And, so I started building a CRM system for that team. At the time, they were all managing, I have a visual aid.
Yeah, absolutely. Bring it on.
They were all managing their day in one of these. This is called a Franklin Planner for anyone that's, under 50. And they would just write all their customer notes in this book, and they would keep track of their calendar and write their to-dos and all this stuff. And then a salesperson would quit or get fired, and they would take this book with them, and you would lose your entire sales history with that client. And the new salesperson would have to start over. And so I built a CRM system that digitized that book. This was before we had Salesforce.com or anything like that, right? And so I had 4 users, and that was it. My 4 salespeople, they would put their stuff in this thing, and then, we could transfer accounts and all that stuff. So I was a developer. They didn't call me a product manager back then. But, my first day, I went up to the sales guy and said, "Hey, what's your biggest problem?" He's like, "I don't know. I'm about to go visit this customer, and I have no idea what the last person said to them." And so I made something that solved that problem. And that's little by little, I realized that was the fun part of my job, not programming and fixing my own bugs all day. So, little by little, I started asking more people what kind of software problems they had or what kind of problems they had, and tried to think of, software solutions for those problems. Really just been doing that my whole life, way before we used the word product manager.
So essentially, solving the customer problem was your destination for you. Everything else was just like the way you got there. So
Yeah.
programming, all of those things were. So speaking of programming, what language do you write your CRM in?
Right, way back then, it was Visual C++. So I had learned C++ as first C and then C++ in college, but most of that was mainframe development stuff back then without window interfaces. And so now it's Visual Studio and the whole .NET framework. When that first started coming out, they created Visual C++, which was essentially the C programming language, but with windows that you could, draw and articulate and then automate. That's what I built the CRM in, and I still have that on a floppy disk somewhere.
Was the UI language WinForms?
Um, that I can't remember. It was just from Microsoft. You could literally buy
Yeah.
Visual C++, and Microsoft probably like got that package from somewhere. I don't actually remember that.
The reason I ask is that, Visual Basic was one of my first programming languages, like real programming language. I learned Flash, of course, my first one, but no one considered that a real language. So Visual Basic was my first one. And then the
Right.
form designer, you had like a place you could like, similar to the AutoCAD, the form had like a window layout. The little
Yeah.
dots again, where you can like lay things out and space things around and so on. And
Yeah.
I always was, and at that time, I think it was like WinForms was the name of that technology. Then it evolved
Right.
into WPF and then all the various versions of it beyond
Right.
that. But I was curious to ask because some people actually did not like using that UI designer for it. So they wrote everything in code. You could just like in Java, you could actually write your entire UI in code where you're writing mathematical numbers and then that translates into visual. So I was kind of curious to know if you fell on that spectrum, if you actually were happy to use the designer.
Yeah, I was happy to use the design tool because I was always sort of a visual person as an architect.
Yeah.
Right. Drawing out, like I could picture the thing in my head. And so drawing it was a way easier way than
I had to cut our interview short if you were like, I actually wrote every line. I defined a button by defining the rectangle coordinates, and I literally plopped it in and I recreated everything on input and so on.
Right. Yeah, for sure.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And so from there, at some point, we went from like I need to write programs as part of solving customer problems to then becoming a formal product manager. Was that transition more natural, or was it something that required more careful planning on your part?
It was pretty organic. So mostly what happened was I had worked on that CRM system for about 4 years. During those 4 years, we were shifting from Visual C++ over to Java because now we were needing web applications for our intranet and stuff like this. And so first, I realized, I just got good at Visual C++, and now I'm like trying to understand classes and Java, the Java framework, and all the calls and puts and all these things that were foreign and new for me. And at the same, so I'm struggling as an early Java developer. I feel like I'm starting over, but at the same time, I'm like 8 years into my seniority on the IT team at this company where I'm working. And I know how all our teams work, and I know all the people that are involved and what's important to the business. And so other software engineers were starting to rely on me for making our documentation, like doing the problem solving, the analysis, writing at first I called myself a business analyst, right? It was like, hey, we don't have a business analyst on this project. Dan, can you help us for a bit? And I was like, yeah, sure. I worked with that team for years. And so I sort of gradually just ignored getting better at Java and focused more on helping people with the documentation part of the work. And then I started to figure out roadmaps, and I went to a company. There was a company way back then called Constructs, which doesn't need to sound familiar to anybody. But one of the leaders of that company was one of the people at the meeting in Colorado where they had the Agile Manifesto meeting. So like 4 years before the Agile Manifesto, I took training from, I forget the guy's name, but that was, I just was really interested in how software was evolving and how people were going to use it. And I got good at listening for customer problems and then translating between that business to the development team that didn't understand the business, but they understood how to program in Java. So I became that translator guy.
That's very fun. And from there, at some point, you went to Autodesk, you went to McKinsey. What was what made you change companies in some ways? Because it seemed like you've been at a company for 10 years. You've been in a very company for a long period of time. So what was often the forcing function for you to go, okay, I think I've, reached the, what I want to do here. There's something really new and interesting coming on. I need to actively do something different.
Yeah. Super easy answer to that question. As a product manager, you can, with some amount of skill and speed and access to customers, you can easily create a roadmap for the next 5 years. And then you're waiting for engineers to build that thing. or you're having the more frustrating side of the conversation where you say, okay, well, we can only build 20% of this roadmap. Which 20% should we build? That's not the fun part for me. And so mostly what I do over the last 32 years is I would build 5 years of a roadmap, and then I would say, hey guys, I'm out. Good luck. And I would go build 5 years of a roadmap for somebody else that needed that work. And the part where we're gradually seeing that roadmap come to life and doing the horse trading thing where, we get new stakeholders with different opinions like that part was just more political and bureaucratic for me. And that just wasn't as fun. So, when you look at my history, you see, 4 or 5 years here and then 4 or 5 years there, and then a new startup for a little while, and then it didn't work. And so then a bigger company. And I sort of just have always been a 3 to 4 years on a project kind of guy, because that's where I get my motivation from. That's where my inspiration is most helpful.
Speaking of 4 or 5 year roadmaps, do you think that time frame is still valid today?
I do, although I've actually just begun a research project to really dig into that more, because I know what you're going to say. It seems like things might be speeding up.
Yes.
And you're right, I think, but there's an actual driver to real change in at least large organizations and maybe also medium ones. And that is that leaders, once they're at a certain level of seniority, get so close to retirement that they don't need to make dramatic, sweeping, revolutionary changes. Now, some at companies like Google, where we were together, they do that anyway, even though they could just coast for 5 years and ride it out and let the next person figure out if AI is going to be a big deal or not. But at most companies, like an insurance company in Iowa or a transportation logistics company in North Carolina, if you're 61, you don't care about AI or NFTs or big data or whatever those things are. You're just trying to ride it out and not break anything. There's a generational throttling to major organization changes. It takes a set of leaders to age out of the market and a new set of leaders that comes in with completely different experiences for real change to happen. And that isn't going to speed up. Now, these new people might be trying to do 28 changes at once instead of one big one, right? They're not just switching from mainframes to PCs anymore, right? They're trying to figure out, how to work remotely and how to figure out what quantum computing is going to mean, and also service the Africa continent with a whole new market because those people are coming online. Like, they're doing all those things together at once, but I think those things will come in packages that still have a 4 to 5 year transition span. I don't know if that makes any sense. And
that makes sense, because if you look at the life cycle of most things in technology, there are some few things we can highlight as like major shifts. Like, for example, the shift from mainframe to PCs, that was one major shift where it was like decentralization and democratization of computers, where everyone now has one in their home, as opposed to having to go to a library or a university or some lab and then have dedicated access to things. And then, of course, the internet was a big one, when everyone realized that what they have on their local machine can actually be now available for the entire world to access, not just people who physically are in that warehouse or the building or in the office. So I think that was a big change. And I think the whole cloud computing wave was a big one as well, where now you no longer needed expensive machines. You just needed lightweight machines, and all the expensive, complicated things was being done by someone else. And of course, AI is the big one right now, where a lot of things you might have assumed as being natural are now considered to be unnecessary because it's being abstracted away and dealt with AI itself. So these are the kind of cases where if you don't react to it, you might find yourself like not even having a business to come back to, because if you're still in the business of selling mainframes, for example, you might find that at some point that market's no longer there because no one is buying them. And we've seen so many companies in that time frame being able to navigate well, and others not navigating well. For
Yeah.
me, growing up, it was always like, at least in my college university labs, you had all these like like purple themed Solaris Sun microsystems
Mm,
machines, and they were like the high end. You had Silicon Graphics, SGI made these like really high end machines, and those were the ones you really wanted.
right.
I went back there about a few years ago. Not a single one of them exists anymore because they've all been replaced by very thin client machines that are networked. All the main software is running somewhere else, and you have a Citrix VM that's basically funneling pixels
Right.
because it's all local to your network. It's fast. You don't really notice the latency differences.
Hmm.
There's so many examples where if you were an executive in that company about to hit retirement age, you might have been like, you know what, I don't see this as a threat. I'm going to keep doing things I've always done. We've been very successful. We're on the cover of all these magazines. We won all these awards for being the most innovative company in the mid 90s 80s and so on. Why would I ever change? And I
Yeah.
think even today, if we read follow like Intel, for example, some of their challenges, it's like there's a lot of reasons why it wouldn't be in their best interest to change how they've always done because they became successful doing something really well. But then you go, that also might be part of what makes them less successful now compared to it. Do
Right.
you
Right.
think you touched upon this earlier as well, where you have people and your CEOs like doing many, many things. Then you
Hmm.
have like, which often causes difficulty in focusing. Then you have someone like, let's say, like Jeff Bezos, his goal is like, how can I create the most customer centric company? That
Mm,
mission statement is independent of internet, no internet, mainframe, no mainframe, AI, no AI. It's
yeah.
more general. It's more broad. Do you think having a broader vision can protect you in some ways from like having naturally acknowledging there'll be changes, you're going to react to it, as opposed to being laser focused on something that you think is going to be definitive, without realizing that on the side view mirror, something big is happening that's going to make all that work irrelevant.
Yeah, yeah. I think what I like about what Jeff Bezos is trying to do with that vision is that he's trying to create a North Star that doesn't have to do with the implementation as much, but it has to do with a thing they can measure for customers that shows them if they're getting better or worse, right? If you've had hundreds of conversations about OKRs and key metrics and North Stars and data mapping and all that stuff. But if you can get a single thing that you can measure that says like, I'm trying to help customers, and if they say I'm helping them, then I'm doing the right stuff. And if they say I'm not helping them enough, then I'm not doing the right stuff. And maybe if I'm not helping them enough, then it's because I need a cloud transformation. But measuring the fact that you've done a cloud transformation or not done the cloud transformation doesn't tell you about the customer value that you're creating. And so I really like companies that have some sort of customer value measurement in their North Star. Because ideally, I think some people go way too far down the rabbit hole of OKR mapping. Um, and they start to lose track of like, what are we really trying to do for customers? And how do we know if we're doing more of that? And most people don't have a way of actually measuring customer value. And so they have a bunch of proxies, and sometimes they're helpful and sometimes they're distracting.
Do you feel it's easier in some industries than others to be able to do this mapping?
Um, I haven't spent a lot of time thinking about that question, but it feels like it's probably yes. It's got to be different in some than others. If you're whatever, if I'm a doctor, I have a bunch of patients, and having those patients be less sick or have them in the hospital less frequently or taking less medication, like those things are all probably improvements. But like helping helping formerly from McKinsey, helping a company build better strategies. Like, how do I measure better strategies? That's hard. And it's tricky. So yes, it's I'm sure it's different and hard for some people and easier for others, but I think it's an important thing to try.
Yeah. And during all of this, you also made another transition where you are also a public speaker. You go to events, you're seeked out by many people to talk about various topics in technology. How did that come about?
Yeah, I sort of stumbled into that like everything else in my life. The in 20 in 2012 I was working at Atlassian, a company that makes Jira for the developers in the group. And one of our people on our team had applied to speak at a Gartner summit. So Las Vegas, Nevada, about 800 like IT VPs and CTOs and stuff like that. Guy on my team, his name was Sven. He had applied. He wrote a talk. He had slides, everything. But then his travel visa got blocked at the last minute. And so he couldn't go to Vegas. And so with 4 or 5 days notice, he asked our team if anyone would be willing to go and deliver his presentation. I knew his content because we worked together really closely. I know the market. I'm fairly comfortable on stage, but I hadn't really ever spoken to 800 people before. But I did it. I took his slides. It was fun. It was so fun. I loved seeing the audience head nodding back to me when they understood something that was hard. Um, and people came up to me after and said that was really great. And they followed me on LinkedIn, even though LinkedIn was still pretty new back then. And all that was just a rush. And so, I came back to work and said, "Hey, can I do that more?" And they said, I mean, a little bit more, but your job is product management. So, I did it. I did it 3 or 4 times a year, and it was always the most fun thing I ever did. And so I, tried to do it a little bit more and a little bit more. And one day I discovered that people actually get paid to do these speeches. I never knew that. I thought you were just trying to elevate yourself as a thought leader, maybe sell some of your own services to the audience, sell from the stage, support a product like Firebase at Google from the stage. All those things are great things to do. I didn't know that people would get money. And one day we were planning an event for I was working at a small startup right before Google, and we were planning an event, and we reached out to an event planner, and they gave us a list of speakers and told us what their fees were. And I was like, fees? What? It was we reached out to Daniel Kahneman, and his fee was $70,000 for an hour. I was like, my brain exploded. I'm like, the most fun thing that I ever do is a job that people have, and it pays really well. It just blew my mind. So I thought about what would that look like as my post corporate career. And I started figuring out if I had a speech, if I wrote a book and somebody bought the book 15 years from now, what would I want that book to say? As a technologist, what am I writing a book about NFTs? And then somebody reads it in 20 years from now. They're like, what the heck was an NFT? And what were they thinking? No offense to the NFT supporters, but I was just trying to figure out when you're picking technology things to write about, which ones have longevity? And that's a hard question. So I thought about it, and I practiced a little more, and I did a little bit more speeches, and eventually I tried charging people money, and they started paying it. And so almost 18 months ago, September of 2023, I quit my job at Google just to speak. And now I'll probably do 75 of them this year. And I'm just helping teams do the stuff that I was always trying to do for our team anyway. Just helping them navigate the world, figure out how to solve problems, use things like AI or whatever comes next after that, robots and quantum computing, probably.
Are the topics ones that you get to choose, or do you get hints from the venues itself?
Well, so mostly in order to actually get paid, you need to have some consistency. Some people have to know, oh, I saw Dan and this is his framework for adopting technology in a world of exponential technology. And it's great. You'll love it. So from a customer's perspective, they need to feel like it's the same talk I've been writing for 7 years. And it's great. And I've rehearsed it hundreds of times. But I also customize a little bit of it to bring some things for your specific industry. So that's how I do it. I have a talk right now that's an hour-long talk, and about 20 minutes of that is specific to a customer and or specific to their industry. And the other 40 minutes are the same every time. I help people figure out why AI isn't going to take your job and why the robots won't take it either, no matter what your job is. And so that's mostly what I'm talking about every time.
It almost sounds like a musical live act where you kind of want to see their back catalog of things you really enjoy and why you're seeing them, but they might have some new content. They might customize it for the venue they're at, and so on.
Yeah. Exactly. A great analogy. It very much is a performance. It takes rehearsal. You know, I have a theater coach that helps me figure out, like, where am I staying on stage? When I say everyone, am I doing this with my hands or not? Right. And there's a right answer to that question. And, those kinds of things matter. And they help your audience, not just drone out while you're talking and look at their phone or whatever, but they helps drive real change. There's a speaker that I saw in like 1996, and I still remember every single thing he said. It changed my life as a technologist, as a business worker. His name is Jeffrey Moore, and his book was called Crossing the Chasm. The most impactful book I ever read. And maybe 15 years later, I saw Eric Ries, and he talked to me about his lean startup book. And again, that changed the way I thought about making stuff. And so, to have that kind of lasting impact, it takes some work and thought and practice and rehearsal and all that stuff.
Both, Jeffrey Moore and Eric Ries, did they have their books out at the time they made their speeches, or was it before their speech itself?
They did, but to caveat this a little bit with time, back then, if you didn't write a book, there wasn't any way for them to know if you're good or not, right? And so once YouTube started to become a place where people could go to watch what you would deliver, then having a 10-minute video of you is more helpful than having a book, although having a book also adds some more credibility as well. But it's not, it used to be that having a book was absolutely a precursor to speaking. Now, if you have video, you can get away with it. I don't have a book. I'm writing a book. It's called The Innovation Machine. It will be out maybe this fall, but I don't have a book, and I'm still getting lots of speeches.
Oh, I was about to ask about the role of YouTube and social media in some cases as well, because there are thousands of clips I get seen all the time. My feed always has snippets of speeches from people about various topics. To be successful as a speaker in the future, do you have to also balance out your persona in real world situations in all the events you're going to, but also have an online version of it where anybody can kind of, top of funnel style, be able to know more about you and the snippets of it that then can be used to entice you to speak in person?
Yes, I think it's definitely helpful, as long as it doesn't dilute what you're trying to talk about. Right. If imagine like you have a speech, Karupa, and you're developing the speech on whatever it is. And somebody hears that your speech is great and they want to book you for an event, and they go to your YouTube channel, and then they find a bunch of videos that aren't you doing that keynote. Which, as a follower of you, it'd be easy for all your awesome content, which is great, to bury your keynote things, right? And so they wouldn't see it, and they'd be like, wait, I thought this guy was the keynote speaker. Maybe I have the wrong Karupa. Right. And so maybe if you have two different kinds of things that you do, I would create two channels, two social profiles, so that it's very clear which of them people should go to if they care about speaking, and which of them they should go to if they care about you as an influencer, because those are just different. Right?
I think what I've learned the most from our conversation so far is brand management is actually a big thing, because you are the brand in this case. It's not a product you're representing, it's actually you. So anything that you do has a major repercussion on how people perceive the services you provide.
Yeah, for sure. And as you follow me on LinkedIn, you'll probably see, like, I do put content out there. I try to post every Monday, every Wednesday, and every Friday to keep myself active in the feed. However, most of that is not a clip from my talk, right? Because what I don't want is somebody watching my whole feed looking at every single video and then feeling like I came on stage and didn't bring them anything new. It's like if you go see a comedian and you already know all of those jokes, it's disappointing a little bit. And so I do write lots of stuff. I try to share lots of thoughts on LinkedIn, especially, and Instagram a little bit. But it's mostly just like what I think about the world, why I'm making the decisions I'm making. It's not little snippets of my talk, 1 minute at a time.
So walk me through your process for how you go from having an idea for a talk and actually writing it, iterating on it, and ultimately delivering it.
For my talk, I like a product manager might, I just wrote my first talk quickly without thinking about it, and I delivered it for free. And then I talked to people in the audience at the reception after the day ended about what they liked and what they didn't like. Right? I said, like, what did I say in there that you disagree with? If you could only remember one thing from what I said today, what would it be? And I asked my audience, like, what my keynote should be. And then I threw out the stuff that they didn't think was that useful or that they didn't bring up at all. And I expanded the stuff that they really liked. And then I did it again. And I did that for 5 years. The whole time I was at Google, I delivered, 4 or 5 talks a year, where each time I was just figuring out, like, what do people really like that I talk about? And what's the core of my thought leadership? Like, what do I really think about the world? And it took the audience helping me to find that. Because I think a lot of stuff, but also other people also think those things. What's the unique thing that I think about the world? And that's a way harder question.
You're almost like A/B testing in real life.
Yeah, for sure. You are A/B testing in real life. And every time I try a new story, I just did it to you at the beginning of this conversation. Like when I'm telling that architecture meeting Mr. Pock story, I'm trying it in different ways every time. And I'm seeing, like, what feels good. I think I rambled on a little bit too long in this one, right? So I'm going to take a look at how I said that, and I'm going to see, could I make that a little tighter? Could I get to the point more quickly? That kind of stuff.
I think the nice thing about podcasts is that it does encourage rambling. It's often a desirable thing because you get to just see someone in their more natural state.
Right.
But I read a lot about how comedians come up with their material. Like, one of the reasons I'm always curious about, like, the rise of comedy clubs and what sustains them, especially given today where very few clubs are really successful because it's all online, but comedy clubs will have a very special place. And one of the number one reasons they give is same as what you did, where they can actually workshop their material. They can see what works. They bring their notepads out. They're taking notes and recording things and scratching things out. Right. And that, to me, I'm like, that makes a lot of sense because you can't get that reaction from anything else in the future.
Yeah, for sure. And also make sure as you're doing that like, when you're delivering a talk for free, because you filled out a call for speakers at the Splunk conference or Salesforce or whatever, then you could do whatever you want. Like, they don't care. But if somebody pays you your rate card for some event, like, you need to dial back the amount of experimentation you're doing there. So, my goal is to do one free talk every quarter. So I'm always, like, looking at, South by Southwest or CES or the Splunkathon or whatever, maybe Google Next one year or something like that, so that I have these places where I'm delivering some material that I get to try out and see, like, if this audience is way more technical than the insurance company in Des Moines, Iowa, do they still like my content? Because they already know a lot about technology. And, so those are the kinds of experiments that I'm still doing. I try to do that once a quarter with a live audience.
For some of this, I guess, testing whether this material is going to resonate and not, has AI helped you in any of these ways? And the reason I'll give you is that I give a lot of presentations at work, and I do like to actually, just like you, change things up in how I talk about the same thing every time I present, just to see, like, what makes the audience understand things better and so on. I recently started playing with just the voice features in all these AI assistants and saying, I'm going to present topic A, tell me what you like and don't like about it, pretend like you are so-and-so,
Yeah.
And I found that, it's getting better, but compared to what it was 6 months ago to what I'm getting like a week ago, I found that the feedback it has given me has been very closely matching what I see in real world when presenting it to individuals.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
curious to know, like, if you tried any of those kinds of things.
I've definitely been experimenting because one of the things I'm doing is helping organizations figure out how they can use AI to do stuff like this. So I want to make sure I'm attempting it as a practitioner also, so that I have firsthand experience. But secondly, there are some things that AI is good at giving you, and it's other things that they're not. I haven't yet done the voice version of that. I mean, I use voice with ChatGPT and Gemini sometimes, but that's just really to transcribe the question. And if I'm at my computer, I just type it. What I do a lot though is put a snippet of my story into ChatGPT or Claude. When I'm talking about my thought leadership, I usually use Claude or Gemini because I like their privacy policies better than ChatGPT's. But I'll put stuff into Claude and I'll say, can you make this a little bit better? Can you make it a little tighter, more crisp? How's the structure? Should I start with a James Bond moment to get right into the action and then explain what's going on a little bit later, or something different? And it's great at giving me that kind of feedback. That's what I use it for right now. Um, I haven't really asked it like what would you think, or what do you think an audience might think. um, I have enough audiences now that I'm getting their real feedback from the real people. So, and they all think different stuff. So it's a little bit hard to generalize. But it's worth trying. I should certainly play around with it a little bit more because AI is pretty knowledgeable.
When writing your presentation speeches, do you start with like pencil and paper, or do you go straight to like something digital?
Uh, Digital, but not a script. Um, what I actually do is I make the slides for my talk first, and usually low fidelity. It's just like 5 words on a white slide, and then 5 more words on another white slide, and then I I write some amount of the deck, maybe 15 slides or so, and then I talk to my camera as if I'm giving the presentation, and I record that and I listen to it back and then figure out like what in there went really well, what in that should be the script, and what in there should I try again. And I write by speaking and transcribing as opposed to typing a script and then trying to read it.
Is it difficult to hear yourself talk and watch yourself?
I get that a lot. It's not for me. Like I have like I'll watch myself over and over again. Like I don't know what it is about me. Maybe I'm a narcissist. um, but like when I do a practice run for a speech, my speech is an hour. I will record myself for an hour and then I'll listen to it for the hour while taking notes. Sometimes I'll listen to it a second time. Sometimes I'll play it again on audio while I'm on a plane. I'm listening to myself a lot of the week, maybe 10 hours a week. I'm listening to tape. If you were playing sports, I'm not a sports guy, so I shouldn't use sports analogies, but if you're playing sports after the game, you watch the tape with the coach and you try to figure out what could you have done better. And if you didn't do that, you'd be a worse sportist.
Yeah, I'm not a big sports person also, but I do like biographies and reading about it. I think one of the things I read about, I think, Tom Brady and Bill Belichick that set them apart from others is that they spent hours reviewing footage of themselves playing, where the team can do better, and also watching other people play, in recordings and seeing like how they're operating. So I think there is something to, it may not be the most fun thing to do for them, but there is something that gives you an edge in just having more data on both what you do and how others deal with similar situations and how they react to things.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Totally agree. So,
So in terms of speaking to audiences, what is the most fun audience to speak to?
wow. I think the kinds of audiences that I really enjoy are the kinds of uh like middle range technology audiences that are not super technical, but they're also not completely non-technical either, right? Somewhere in the middle. Like a fun example, one of my most fun events this year was a bunch of people that are salespeople at a cybersecurity software company. Now, I first signed up for that and I was like, what am I going to tell a cybersecurity company about AI? Like, I'm sure they got it figured out. And what I actually learned is that I'm not talking to the engineers. I'm not talking to like the senior, security ops people. I'm talking to the salesperson that just has a deck that somebody else wrote. And they're trying to like explain what this highly sophisticated thing does. And they're not the developer and the customer doesn't understand it either. And those are the kinds of people that I like. I give them a way of explaining something that they are so grateful for, because now they can use that way of explaining that thing to their customers too, and they're just so grateful, and it's such a binary switch where they just all of a sudden understand something that was super confusing and threatening before, and that's the most fun group for me.
When it comes to speaking, we described a lot of things that you're very good at.
Mm.
One of the things that I've always found, working with you in real life specifically, is that you have a knack for simplifying very complicated things. And I wonder if that indirectly shows in how you present material, because you just mentioned right now where the sales team was able to suddenly get it. It might have a lot to do with, not that the material was new to them, but the way you kind of simplified some of these abstract concepts and the things they can relate to. I wonder if that played a big role.
Yeah, for sure. And that's in my stage intro. Right. It literally says Dan's superpower is making complex things simple and useful.
I was about to exactly ask, like, what do you think your superpower is? And you just, read it from your actual biography.
Yeah. It's because I started at a very non-tech company. Like that first company that I described at the beginning of this call was a coupon printing company. Like they print coupons for the newspaper. Those people didn't know anything about PCs or the internet or what Java even was. And quickly, out of necessity, I became a translator between non-tech people and tech people. And I just had 30 years of practicing that over and over again, with like plopping myself in a new industry with a new piece of software that I just learned 3 days ago. And I had to try to explain that to my VP of operations, whatever. Like that just was a thing that I just got good at. And maybe it was practice, or maybe there's some of that that's inherently, in my DNA. I'm not sure, but that's for sure the thing I'm exploiting now as a speaker.
Do you get stage fright?
Sort of, but not really. Before I speak, like 20 minutes before they call my name and I'm in the back of the room and I can see all these people and they're all like rumbling, and I hear the president of the company speak about all the stuff they're trying to do. My stomach's in knots and I'm, nervous for sure. But then as soon as I'm like in my content, as soon as I'm just thinking about the stuff that I've rehearsed hundreds and hundreds of times, it's not that hard. I just really am not thinking about it. I'm thinking about the content and just trying to be myself on stage. And I'm talking like I talk to you, right? I'm not really thinking about the fact that I'm in an arena and there's like 4,000 people out there. That's a little scary sometimes, but I'm mostly, I don't think about it.
And I think as product managers, you get a lot of presentation, you get a lot of practice presenting as well. It might not be a large group, but being able to think on your feet, having to suddenly have an hour to come up with material you can present to people. You have definitely more time as a public speaker in some of these cases, but I feel like there are a lot of opportunities you get because all these surveys still people ask like, what is the thing that terrifies them the most? It's always public speaking. That always comes up.
Yeah.
To me, in some ways, I'm like, yeah, it doesn't bother me. The same nervousness comes up if I go like a talk in a real life venue and so on, but not too much. But then you go back. Also, as a PM, almost every week, you're just like constantly doing this. And when I think back when I was an intern, and I gave my first presentation to like my larger team, my intern project. Like the night before, the day before that, I was just like dreading it. The way people describe it to me is kind of like I've never been skydiving. It's on my bucket list of things to do, but absolutely terrified of it. They're like, yeah, you're terrified, getting on the plane, or you're terrified, like, as you look out and you're about to like jump on and so on. But once you jump, it's fine. Once you reach terminal velocity, you don't really feel anything. I'm like, that's not comforting to me in any way, shape, or form, but I'll take your word for it. I think public speaking is the same thing to a lot of people, because most people, I think, don't ever get the opportunity to practice public speaking or speak in any kind of a venue that is larger than like as people are familiar to them. And so going up in front of strangers to talk about something, and they don't know you, you don't know them, and all of that, I can imagine that actually is a terrifying thing for a lot of people. So I can still see where the surveys keep mentioning that.
Yeah, it for sure is. But like, now that I've done it a bunch of times, one thing I think is that audiences are usually really nice. Like if they don't like you, they're just going to not be engaged. They're not going to yell. They're not going to get heckled, right? They're not going to stand up at the end and grab the microphone and say, you suck. They're going to be really nice. And so you're right. As a product manager, we're used to pitching things. And about half the time as a product manager, you pitch your thing to the team or the VP or the whoever, and they don't like it. And they tell you they don't like it. And they send you back to the drawing board and make you do it all over again. Your audience is never going to do that. Mostly you'll get 3 people that come up and say, that was really great. Thank you. And then all the other people, whether they liked it or not, they're just going to fade off into the distance and you never see them again.
Yeah. Do you prefer speaking in venues where you can see the audience, or do you prefer speaking in venues where the illumination is only on the stage, so all you basically see are just darkness and occasionally the light from a phone that just like turns on and off?
Yeah, I love being able to see the audience. It's really hard for me when I can't see the people. I can't see the head nods. I can't see, every once in a while people take their phone out and take a picture of your slide, and then oh, this is resonating, and that keeps happening. I must be doing okay. A couple times the light on me has been so bright, all I could see was light, and I have no idea who's out there, and that definitely makes for better video, because you got a nice big spotlight on you. But I would much rather see the audience's eyes and their head nods and their phones taking pictures.
I have a few more questions on the same vein. When you're speaking, I've seen speeches where people are often just on stage. And then I've seen also situations, this is mostly I've seen in I think at Salesforce, actually, a lot of presentations and speeches there, where the speaker is actually walking between the tables and going around the room in a zigzaggy, like a Roomba in some ways.
Yeah.
Which is your preference?
I think I'm generally not a walking around the room kind of speaker. I think there are contexts where that's helpful. Where you're more engaging, where you're getting stuff out of the audience, asking them a bunch of questions, asking them what they feel like. One of my mentors, his name is Seth Madison, and he is a master at that. He jumps down off the podium or off the stage and comes around the audience and sits down with people and says, what do you think? What was your favorite thing about today? And he's just great at that. And as a conference closer, when you're trying to leave the audience with a comforted, recapped, right amount of energy level, when you're trying to do all those things as a closing speaker, coming down into the room and pulling everyone else, meeting people where they are, is really, really helpful. I don't do that yet. Maybe someday I will incorporate that into my stuff, but right now I don't do that at all. And maybe I do ask people things. I poll the audience and get hand raises and stuff like that, but I don't come down into the room that much.
Yeah. Last question that's in that same train. I know some speakers like to have music playing when they are coming up on stage, and it's often the music that they typically get excited by and do all of this all this work. And I actually asked this question to, when I was in college, one of my AI professors, his name is Patrick Winston,
Mm.
he always would play Rolling Stones before he would get up on stage. I asked him, like, why do you do this? Like, why do you play Rolling Stones music before? And these were like large lectures. So like, what, 400, 500 people there. So it was definitely a large enough thing. And then he does like 3 times a week for however the semester long it is. He's like, yeah, for me, that helps me get into the zone because I do this day in and day out, like talking about AI, teaching about AI and so on. But I can't be in that professorial research mode where I'm like completely disengaged. Putting this music on triggers something where I'm now suddenly doing something where I'm like, this is not my norm. I need to now put on a performance and do a good job teaching.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
I've seen public speakers often do something similar. So I'm curious to know where you stand on that.
yeah. So generally, it will matter if the event people are set up for that or not. Like, how's the audio in the room? Are you in are you in a 150 person room in the basement of a Marriott, or are you, in Vegas with, 1,000, 1,200 people there? That matters a lot. So a lot of times I go to an event and the event people will say, do you have a preference for walk up music? And I'm still finding the right song for me. For a long time, I've used a cover of the Beatles song, uh, uh, Re- Revolution. Yeah, say you want a revolution. That song. That's my sort of go to song. There's a cover of it by the Mona Lisa twins that I think is cool and a little bit more modern. Uh, I like Imagine Dragons or OK Go. Like, those are the kinds of, like,
Yeah.
they get the audience like thumping a little bit before you get up there. It just brings the energy in the room up a little bit, and that can be super helpful. But finding a great song that has the right beat that also has the right message is hard. And I've struggled a little bit with some of the more modern songs to find what that song might be for me.
What is your dream venue to make a speech in?
Whew, wow. I don't know. I think my favorite venue last year was really amazing. I loved it. It was the Cleveland Public Auditorium, which is just a venue. It used to be like a basketball. Probably the Cavs played there originally. Really, really 100-year-old thing. The stage is all ornate. Like, it's amazing. There's like 2 decks. It's just a really, really wonderful place to be. The stage is cool. The backstage is epic. That was really fun. The mostly by the time they like outfit the room, they all look the same. They're putting the stage there. The wider screens are great. Like, if you get like cinematic wide screens, that's super fun to play in. As the room gets bigger, I think that's fun. The room I don't want to be in is the one where there's people all around you and you have to keep turning as you speak. That's so
Yes.
awkward and hard. I don't want to do that. But specific venues, I don't know. Somewhere in Vegas, those are always fun. They're big and they're.
What do you think of the Sphere in Vegas?
I think that's really cool. I think that would be neat to speak in for sure. But I would spend months on figuring out what my graphics were going to be for that presentation. Like, it would be a massive, massive
Because you do have the opportunity there to do something very different, where it's not just going to be a rectangular screen, but actually take advantage of the full, 360 degrees of it all.
Yeah, that would be amazing. In fact, now that you planted that seed, I'm going to start working on that already, so that when it does happen, I have the slides ready. That's
Perfect.
going to take some work.
Dan, is there anything else that you would like to share with the world?
No, I think just I really enjoy having conversations with people that care about the stuff that we're talking about right now. So if you are on LinkedIn or Instagram, find me. I'm pretty easy to find. My name is pretty unique. There's only like 20 of us in the world. So you'll find me and connect with me on LinkedIn or Instagram. I'd love to follow you back, have some conversations in the future. And I wish everyone the best of luck, and I want them to let me know how I can be helpful.
And I'll make sure there are links to all of that in the description in the show that you can see as well. Dan, thank you so much. It was great catching up with you, and best of luck.
Likewise. Thanks, man. I'll talk to you later. Bye.